Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives, Reach Ireland's crime podcast. My name is Paul Healy. I'm crime correspondent for the Irish Daily Star and for the Irish Mirror. And I'm joined, as always, by Michael O'Toole, our crime and defence editor. How's it going, Michael?
Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Unusual week this week will come to us, I'm sure, but
Do we ever have a usual week?
no, but I suppose the what would you call it? I suppose abuse and vitriol on social media is becoming a new challenge for both of us. Maybe source of amusement, depending on what way you want to look at it. But
I wouldn't. We can talk about this later, but I wouldn't
we will.
describe it as a problem for me because there's a very good writer, Frankie Gaffney. Now, he was on Twitter, but he disappeared. Fair play to him, right? But he always just said, it's only words. Now, that's slightly ironic because he's a writer, but I know where he's coming from. Some people would say hurdy words. I long ago came to the conclusion, if people want to act the bollocks on Twitter, they can say what they want. I'm under no compunction to read it. So block and mute is your friend or your friends.
Elon wants to get rid of the block button, but let's come back to that because the first thing we want to mark on this podcast is the death of a man in County Kerry, and you were covering this story, Mick. This is Mr. Jared Keneally, who was found dead at his home in Kerry there on Monday.
No, it actually didn't happen at his home. He was injured in an incident outside a pub in the village of Knockannure, which I don't know the geography what they are, but Listowel Gardaí are investigated. I believe it's on the Kerry-Limerick border. Now, Mr. Keneally, he was in his 40s, very well known and very well respected family in the area. Now, we know that a man has subsequently appeared in court, a man called Kieran Brady. He's 35 from Athy in County Limerick. Now, he appeared in court on Tuesday night charged with the manslaughter of Mr. Keneally. The incident happened early on Monday morning, just around midnight on Monday morning, outside a pub in Knockannure. And the court heard that Mr. Keneally was stabbed once in the leg. Now, Kieran Brady, as I said, charged with manslaughter. He appeared on Tuesday night. He has been refused bail and he's back in court on the 4th of June, so next Tuesday, I believe. Now, Mr. Keneally, well-known and well-respected family. He had spent quite a long time in Australia, but he had come back to his native Knockannure in Ireland. I think it's in previous months, maybe a year, but as I say, very well known. Now, his funeral is taking place on Friday morning in Knockannure, and the death notice is up on our RIP.ie, and it talks about how he is well respected and well missed. So look, it'll obviously be a very big funeral, but as you know, Paul, we always try to mark deaths, and a man has appeared in court charged over the death of Mr. Keneally.
And because of that, we can't go any further into the detail. Obviously, there's an ongoing investigation in relation to that.
Yes, just to repeat, he is charged with manslaughter, Kieran Brady, and he will appear in court again next week.
So we also want to talk about the Hutch family, never out of the news, sadly, because of the fact that a tragedy follows them wherever they go, and they are newsworthy. Even, I suppose, maybe members of the family who have no involvement in criminality, who have been caught up in the actions of others. And two stories that we've covered this week are firstly in relation to the very tragic death of Eddie Hutch Jr. and then also the actions of his brother Ross in Wheatfield Prison in Dublin. But we'll talk about the funeral first. Just obviously marking the death of Eddie Hutch Jr. I just want to start off the bat by saying that Eddie Hutch Jr. in more recent years would not have been considered to be a serious criminal, a petty criminal, I suppose you'd call him. He had a lot of convictions, 100+ convictions, but mostly for, theft type offences and small drug offences. But nonetheless, quite well known to Gardaí and known in the inner city. He passed away last Monday. He was found dead in his home in Poplar Row in the inner city. And just to remind people, in case they don't know, that is the former home of Eddie Hutch Jr., so Eddie's father. And he was murdered at the front gate, or actually in the front of that property, on the 8th of February 2016. And that was a fairly high profile murder in the Kinahan Hutch feud.
Yes, and so Eddie's father, as you say, known as Neddy, you'll have covered the court case of Jerry Hutch, who would have been Neddy's brother and the uncle of Eddie, who died a few days ago. So he was, you say, you're quite right, he was shot dead at his home on the 8th of February 2016, 3 days after the Regency, when David Byrne was murdered. Jerry Hutch, Eddie's uncle, and Neddy's brother, was charged, as you covered the case. He was charged with the murder of David Byrne, but he was acquitted in April last year. But you're right. I mean, how much suffering can one family endure? They've had an awful lot. I mean, just looking, Gary, who had been another cousin, who had been a cousin of Eddie, he was shot dead in September 2015. Then there was Gareth, who was shot dead in May 2016. And then we also had Derek Coakley Hutch, who was shot dead in January 2018. But there have also been a number of tragedies. John Hutch, Jerry's brother, died a few years ago as well. So really, this family has been through the mill. And just one question for you. I think you were covering the funeral of Eddie. What church was it from?
It's the Our Lady of Lourdes Church there on Sean McDermott Street. So the same church where most of these funerals, the funeral of Eddie Hutch, happened there. People might remember
Gary Hutch.
Yeah, people might remember that funeral as well. Jerry Hutch, kind of his last maybe public appearance, was at his brother Eddie's funeral at that particular church. Jerry the Monk Hutch was not seen at the funeral on Monday. He is known to be around Dublin and has been seen in recent weeks, but he at least didn't appear at the church, wasn't seen at the church. But fairly high profile members of the family did attend. And perhaps some of it is indicative of what we've been talking about in this pod in recent weeks, that certainly the Kinahan Hutch feud is not in the place where it once was. The security and concerns are not there. And obviously the concerns among the family members are not there, because members of the family who would have been considered top targets of the Kinahan cartel attended the funeral there on Monday, and that included Patsy Hutch, a brother of Jerry Hutch, and his sons. So Derek Delboy Hutch is a convicted killer and somebody who was only recently out of prison and considered a volatile criminal, and also Patrick Hutch Jr. would have been a central target for the Kinahan cartel, and he also attended the funeral. And an Eddie Staunton also attended, a well-known Hutch associate who previously was shot.
And Patrick Jr., obviously he was charged in relation to the murder of David Byrne, but there was a nolle prosequi entered, so the charge was effectively dropped against him. Let me ask, Paul, was there much guard activity around the church?
I mean, a small presence. I would imagine but we understand that there was a discreet Garda presence. Obviously, they have to keep watch on it. There are still concerns, but as we have been guided, and certainly what we're now seeing, the security concerns are nowhere near the level that they used to be. I mean, practically the inner city was shut down during the funeral of Eddie Hutch, and the subsequent funerals of Gareth Hutch, for example, was a massive security operation. We're nowhere near that level now.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. If you do compare and contrast to, say, the funeral of Eddie Hutch, you're right. There was a very significant Garda operation then. So that, I think that's a very good phrase, Paul. The feud is in a different place. We don't know where it's at. I used the word moribund. We don't know. The guards have an idea because they've, for example, they've taken the community reassurance bait, or we call it the post, from Patsy Hutch's house in central Dublin, which was there for several years, really at the height of this feud. So you're right, Paul. I think this is another indicator, and I think that's a very nice phrase. It is in another place.
Mm-hmm. I want to just talk about the funeral just briefly, because some of the comments made by the parish priest, in fairness, were fairly poignant, and he did mention a particular tribute to Eddie Hutch that was left on RIP.ie, and was by a Dublin man who didn't even know Eddie Hutch, and he said, "I don't even know this man, Mr. Hutch, but I know that your name is one that's tarnished in tragedy, and his thoughts went out to the family, and they've suffered through so much, and the priest acknowledged that, and that was one kind of poignant thing that was pointed out, that this family has gone through so much tragedy over the years. There were also some kind of, I suppose, funny anecdotes about Eddie Hutch, and gave an insight into his life. Apparently, he was a withdrawn person and didn't like the limelight, so to speak. But there was an anecdote by a family friend or a family member, I believe, about Eddie and his pals, and how they would go drinking, and how he particularly liked to cook for his friends. And he was asked where he learned his cooking skills, and he said, "Only in the best place, the Joy." So he had a sense of humor about him anyway. All those years that he would have spent in and out of prison, that was his attitude towards it.
And Christopher Bouncer Hutch would have been mentioned as well, who was another brother who died quite a few years ago. So that's another loss for the family.
It is, and then look, his two brothers, probably the only closest surviving relatives, were unable to attend the funeral. Now, they are both volatile, dangerous criminals. They're not, what would you say? I suppose gangsters in the traditional term, like as in they would have been central players in the feud or anything like that. But they were nonetheless volatile criminals with serious issues, both of whom are in prison. And so the security decision was made. Neither of them could be released from prison to attend the funeral. So we actually heard the priest mentioned, there was a live stream of the funeral, which I watched myself, and Alan Hutch and Ross Hutch, both brothers of Eddie Hutch Jr., watched the proceedings from prison on a webcam, basically. They're both very dangerous. Alan Hutch was only very recently, earlier this month, jailed for 21 months for robbing a woman at an ATM. He has serious addiction issues, and we even understand at the moment in prison he's isolated from most of the population, and needs serious care and attention. And then Ross Hutch, he is serving a 10-year sentence for brutally assaulting his former ex-girlfriend, and his ex-girlfriend's partner as well was assaulted. A very, very violent incident. He has 70 plus convictions to his name. So he's in Wheatfield prison.
And you may remember we got a photograph of the victim of that attack that he got the 10 years for, the man, and it was a slash attack. He slashed him in the face, and the picture was particularly gruesome. I mean, this wasn't just a cut. This was a full thing to the face. So, and 10 years is a very long stretch for an assault, and I think that's an indication of how serious that was.
Yeah, a brutal assault. Again, Ross Hutch wouldn't have been, what you would consider to be a player in the feud, but he has had his troubles over the years. We covered a lot of what went on in his life over the past couple of years, and he is, I suppose, just one example of the tragedy of this family. Like, the feud had its impact on every member of the family, and I think that has come up in all of their court cases, even how the impact of the threats on their lives affected their activities and what they got up to. That's not to excuse their behavior, and they have been punished for it. But you'd wonder, if the feud hadn't happened, what direction maybe their life might have gone in.
Let me ask you, Paul, did either of them apply for a temporary release for the funeral?
Yeah, so my understanding is Ross Hutch applied and was refused to be allowed out for compassionate leave for either the wake on the Saturday or for the funeral on the Monday. Alan Hutch, I don't think, asked, but what I was guided was that both of them wouldn't have been allowed anyway. And nothing to do with the feud. What I was guided about was it's nothing to do with their Hutch name or any concerns for their lives in relation to the Guinean cartel. It's just simply because it just would not be. I mean, it wouldn't be in practice to let such volatile criminals out for the day, particularly someone like Ross Hutch, who, is serving a 10-year sentence for a brutal, brutal assault. They can't be seen to let him out for the day for any kind of compassionate leave, and then with the multiple convictions as well. So it's nothing to do really with their name as to why they didn't get out. Compassionate leave does happen for other prisoners. It's just got to do with how volatile they are.
But yeah, you had that story about them, neither of them attending, but you also had a story about Ross Hutch as well. He has been in the wars in prison.
Yeah, well, you know yourself when you're making inquiries about
Mm.
someone, suddenly you get, information that you weren't even looking for. And so, yes, we got another story out of this in relation to Ross Hutch's activities in prison. I just thought this was interesting, even just, I suppose we'd heard whispers, but we know a little bit more now about the makeup of Wheatfield Prison and how the Hutches are now mixing with the general population. So, the Hutch. Faction, if you'd call it that, and Hutch family members who were in prison were all segregated since 2016 from the rest of the prison population. But I was told that Ross Hutch was back in the general prison population, and it hasn't been going very well for him ever since. He was involved in a particularly violent brawl, I'm told, 2 weeks ago in Wheatfield Prison, and then on Saturday was viciously assaulted in the yard of Wheatfield Prison. And then I understand he subsequently got involved in a revenge attack himself on the perpetrator. Uh, this is all within days of his brother's funeral. So, yeah, literally Saturday, the day of the wake, he was being assaulted in the yard of Wheatfield Prison.
It sounds absolutely chaotic. And I remember, and listeners may remember, that the prison service effectively segregated them in prison so that anybody connected to the Hutch family, rather than faction family, would have been in Wheatfield prison, and anybody, the real base of the Kinahans was Mountjoy.
Yes. Yeah, but also within Wheatfield Prison, there was dubbed the Hutch Landing. There was an entire landing of prisoners that were only Hutch family members and associates. Even Jonathan Dowdall, for a brief period of time before he was moved to Limerick Prison, was also on the same landing. Jerry Hutch was famously on that landing. But that's no longer the case. No longer exists. Again, an indicator that even within the prison service, they've made a determination that there is no longer any need to segregate Hutch affiliated prisoners from the rest of the prison population. So that threat isn't there, but that hasn't stopped someone like Ross Hutch, with the violent history that he has, still getting involved in the odd bust up. And unfortunately, there have been three in the past 2 weeks.
And I remember at the start of the feud, shortly after the murder of Gary in September 2015, there was an attack on couple, I think it was on one Hutch member. I'm trying to remember which one it was. And they were both very serious, but that was in Mountjoy.
Yeah.
And, other inmates came to, I won't say which Hutch it was because I can't remember, but there were very, very serious assaults. So that led to the Hutches being moved away from Mountjoy and over to Wheatfield, which is in West Dublin.
I recall it might not be that story, but I recall you having a story a few years ago about Alan and Ross and how they had assaulted each other in prison. So yeah, they're not beyond even assaulting one another, unfortunately.
Yeah, but no, they're definitely. There were two attacks on a Hutch shortly after Gary was murdered, and they were both extremely serious in Mountjoy.
Mm-hmm. It's strange. I meant to mention it earlier, but it's just I'm thinking back about when I suppose I would have first been writing about Ross Hutch and Eddie Hutch Jr. And it was just into 2015. Eddie Hutch Jr. Was on a winning streak, if you can remember that. And Ross appeared in his stead, so Eddie wasn't able to actually, appear as a contestant, but he was in the audience. And I remember the camera went to him at one point, and he kind of expressed his delight. I think Ross won €33,000 in total worth of prizes. That was right before the feud. They were both considered petty criminals at that time, and it was more kind of a bit of a joke almost. It's like, how did these guys end up on winning streak? Little did we know, I suppose, how much we would be writing about them in the years to come.
I remember Ross was very cocky on that show, wasn't he?
Oh, he was. I remember. Yeah, but and life was different for them then. They weren't under threat,
And that's 20. It was 2015. It was before
Gary right before the murder of Gary Hutch.
So that's 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And what a 9 years it has been. Really horrific for the family, and the stress and the pressure that they were under. In fact, I remember at one of the funerals, I think it was Derek Coakley Hutch, a family member stood up and said, "We're a family, we're not a cartel." And that's one of the real quotes that has always stuck with me from this feud.
Mm-hmm. It really comes across, I mean, they are in many ways a united family. You saw Patsy Hutch, who appears to be a sort of a patriarchal figure for a lot. I mean, who knows the makeup of families, but certainly for the people who have been attending these funerals, the past number of funerals, Patsy Hutch kind of leads the family.
Mm.
He was carrying the coffin at each and every one of these funerals, including Eddie Hutch Jr.'s. He sits front and center right next to the coffin. He seems to be very much the leadership figure of that family, and they all appear to be united around him.
That's a very interesting point because from the outside, the main figure for us would be Jerry Hutch, the monk. But
Mhm.
that's always struck me as really interesting that Patsy does seem to be the main man in the family. I
Yeah,
suppose every family has someone like that. My own family, there's our oldest brother who would be the main man. And I don't know about your family, but there is
mhm,
always one. And Patsy does seem to be
mhm,
the leader of the
mhm.
family.
He was target number one for the Kinahan cartel. Survived multiple attempts on his life, very, very serious attempts on his life in his home in Champions Avenue. There, as we've discussed, was monitored 24 hours a day. Um, but he does seem to be the central figure in all of these family funerals.
So look, hopefully that's the end of the Hutch family suffering, but they have suffered an awful lot in the last 9 years.
They certainly have, and there are a lot of innocent people caught up in it too, innocent
Mm.
family members caught up in it too. And I do think about the family of John Hutch in particular, and he had lived a very tragic life, hiding and scared and paranoid that he was going to be murdered. And even I think at one stage when he was on holidays, jumping off a balcony because he thought a hitman was coming for him, sadly falling down the stairs. That is very sad, and I'm very sad for his children and for his wife, I would imagine, who are completely innocent in all of this.
But even so, we say up to 18 men have died as a result of this feud. And let's nail one thing: the people that Kinahans killed, most of them weren't involved. Do you know? I often think of Martin O'Rourke, but you know what I mean. Even members of the Hutch family, because we know there is a Hutch organized crime gang, we know that, but most of the Hutch people were just targeted for their name. Do you think that's fair?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, they were literally just going for anybody that was affiliated. I think of Noel Kerwin, who was
Mm.
apparently just assassinated because he was photographed standing next to Jerry Hutch. Appears to be totally innocent. Gareth Hutch, okay, there was an ongoing dispute between him and others, and he was murdered kind of almost as a result of that, and it just tied into the Kinahan Hutch feud in
Mm.
a sense. Um, Probably a debate for another time, but I do wonder, if we really drill down into all of these feud murders, how many of them can you really tie back to the original dispute between, Gary Hutch and Daniel Kinahan? That actual, and then the Regency itself. As the murders went on, they became less and less and more tangentially about the
Mm.
feud.
Well, and it is important to say that there are members of, let's call them not the Hutch family, but the organized crime gang
Yes.
who did escape.
Mhm.
And the Kinahans were after them, but they couldn't get them.
Yeah, no, they took the precautions, but I mean, even some of the individuals, they fled the jurisdiction. They're now back in the jurisdiction. So again, that's an indication that they think the threat has dissipated.
Right. Okay.
We'll move on
What's
to
next?
Parnell Square.
Yes. Right. Here we go. This will be okay.
Okay, well, firstly, I'm going to talk about the court appearance. Again, like every single time we cover a court appearance, we have to just tell you what is said in court, and we can't go outside of that. Having said that, there are also sometimes things that are in the media that are quite well reported, and the likes of the Taoiseach get involved. We can, of course, then have a little bit of leeway in terms of talking about the incident. But in terms of talking about a person who's charged with an offence, we can only talk about what they're charged with and what's said in court. So that's what I'm going to do first, and then we can talk about the wider issue, perhaps.
So the background is there was an incident, and someone has been charged over it. There was an incident at Parnell Square yesterday, which is Tuesday.
Yeah, and this issue has been well reported, so I think we're safe enough to say,
Mm.
I mean, this incident involved school children who were on their way. There's a school and a creche there in the inner city area. And this individual is alleged to have come up brandishing a knife outside of a school bus, and it was reported to Gardaí. And it's basically two incidents. An incident allegedly happened on Gardner Street, and an incident allegedly happened on Parnell Street. And Gardaí moved quite quickly and arrested a man in relation to the incident. And it went quite viral, and the story went everywhere because of the fact that a previous incident, which is also before the courts, occurred in that area.
Yes, so the context is this is the same school in which several children were injured and an assistant was allegedly stabbed as well. This is before the courts, so we're very limited. We know a man has been charged, but that was the 23rd of November last year.
Yeah. Now, having said that, sometimes when you go to court appearances, you get very scant details, and you can only just report. Quite a lot of detail was heard in court today. So I was in Dublin District Court today for the appearance of the man that has been charged in relation to the incident, which happened yesterday. His name is Oisin Pivoy, and he's a 38-year-old man. He is from Granby Row in Dublin 1. And he is charged with 4 counts in total. So he's charged with he's charged with the production of a knife ×2, and he is charged with threatening and abusive behaviour on Parnell Square and also on Gardner Street. So he appeared in court. He was in custody, and he was wearing a black t-shirt and pink trousers. And the court basically heard that he wants to represent himself, that he didn't want a solicitor to represent him. Some of the first things that we heard was in relation to that, and there was a bit of a dispute over whether he should have a solicitor represent him. So there was a solicitor who spoke on behalf of Mr. Pivoy's family, who said that she was willing to represent him and that Mr. Pivoy's family wanted him to be represented by a solicitor. But Mr. Pivoy spoke up and said in court that he didn't want to be represented and he wanted to represent himself, basically.
May I ask, Paul, just one thing before we go on. Did the court hear what reply, if any, he made to the charges?
Yeah, so Detective Garda Paul Griffin, he gave evidence of arrest, charge and caution, and he told how he went through each of the charges, and the accused said, I object to one of them, and I object, and I have evidence that that is not true to 2 of them. So those were his responses to the charges after caution. Then the judge asked whether this individual was a threat to the community, a threat to the public, and the Garda responded that yes, he was. The judge then asked for the facts, the alleged facts, as to why this man has been arrested and charged. So I'm just going to go into that. The Detective Garda said that they were called to the scene of a man brandishing a knife and acting in an erratic manner. And that he was doing so around members of the public and around children who were aged between the age of 6 and 12 years old. He also said that this individual, the accused man, threatened a woman with a baby and told her to fuck off. That was at that moment. Then the accused actually sat up and said, "I did not," in response to that. The Detective Garda then continued and told how the accused man approached a coach, a bus full of school children, that he blocked that coach. He stood in front of it with his arms outstretched and holding a knife up towards the bus. And he said that the children in the bus observed the man with the knife, and that 2 of the children were even heard shouting, "We're going to die." So Detective Garda Griffin, he outlined, the incident also on Gardner Street, where another school bus was involved, and he said that this individual came up and pointed a knife at the bus driver in a clear attempt to intimidate the bus driver. He said the bus driver closed the doors of the bus because he feared for his safety. The accused stood up in court again and said, "I think it is unlawful." Judge Jones. Judge Jones, Jared Jones, oversaw the case. He decided that the accused should be remanded into custody. He said that he is a danger to the public in his current state and to children. And he also went on to say, "Well done" to the Garda, the arresting Garda. And he said, "Thanks to the bus drivers involved in protecting these children, my deepest sympathies." And he was then remanded into custody, and he'll appear again before Cloverhill District Court next month.
Okay, so that's that. Can
Yeah.
we talk about nationality now?
Yeah, look, I think in general, how we report certain types of incidents, we've decided, maybe personally, not the newspaper, but I'll speak for myself first. You can speak for yourself. How to maybe cover certain types of events because of maybe the language that's being used now on social media, and um, we're not trying to shape people's opinions or get involved in a political debate, but I think there has become, unfortunately, a necessity to give details that maybe we wouldn't ordinarily have given before when it comes to a person's nationality when they're accused of an offence. Um, my reasoning for doing that, for example, when there is a natural assumption by, let's say, a certain cohort of people that an individual who's committed a violent crime must be a foreign national, I think it's incumbent on us, the press, to again, we're not trying to shape public opinion, but to calm the storm, so to speak, to actually give the facts. It doesn't hurt to go into a little more detail and say, if this person is an Irish national, for example, we'll say that. Now, we're still quite limited. When a person is a suspect in it, and most people know this, but it turns out an awful lot of people on social media don't know this. And I'm not trying to say I'm patronizing. It's just some people just don't seem to understand that in the law in this country, you and I, as journalists, Mick, we're not able to just name and shame somebody because they're accused of something. We can name somebody when they have been charged with an offence in court. So then we can name them. And then when they're found guilty, we can say whatever. That's the 90% of circumstances.
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Yes, you're right. Once people appear in court, you're free to name them. But we can, and I think it's up to every paper, and everybody gets different guidance. My view is once someone has been charged at station level by the guards to appear in court, so say you're charged at 9:30 one night and they're appearing in court at 10:30 the next morning. If I can, I would try to name them then, because that's effectively starting. Although there is case law that sub judice and contempt only kicks in when they appear, the accused appears in front of the judge. But if someone has been charged at station level to appear in court the next day, I will strive to name them. But that's because it's kickstarted, and we don't really, and people will probably fisk us and go back over stuff where we have named people who have been arrested without being charged. Normally, the normal state of affair is we don't name people who have been arrested. We will name them when the decision has been made to charge them. That's normally maybe there are other things we bring it in, but that's effectively it. So would you not agree that we try to name people once they are charged?
We do try to name people once they are charged, yeah, but our hands are tied when that is not the case, and there seems to be a lot of people who don't maybe realize or understand that there isn't some grand conspiracy. We're not trying to cover up the names and identities of people. But I think both of us would say, no matter the person's nationality or who they are, once they are charged and sentenced with a criminal offence, we'll name and shame them, whether they're from Romania or from Dublin 1 or whatever. We will name them and give as much detail as we can. The only thing that's changed for me in terms of the way I write something recently is I have felt the need when there has been so much vitriol and hate going on in relation to certain cohorts of society. I think it's fair enough for me to say this. Us journalists, we're not really supposed to have opinions. Having said that, I don't have to support racism. I don't have to be pushing and helping assist a racist agenda. And so I was aware, and most of us are now aware, when we report on certain violent incidents, of what's going on in the ether. So when we know certain facts, we try to report them as accurately and as best we can. And that is why I think now we have to, unfortunately, go into the detail of a person's nationality, where we might not have done so before. We might have just said the man or the woman. We might now have to say the Irish man, or the Romanian man, But
Right.
that is merely, in my opinion, just for the sake of accuracy, because otherwise it just spirals out of control. What do you think?
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different view.
Okay.
There's a saying in journalism: facts are friendly.
Yeah.
Okay, and I believe that. So, if let me give you an example. When Aisling Murphy was murdered, there was a rumor. Remember all that rumor? Was it that he was this killer was a Syrian? He was staying at an iPass hostel there. All that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I debunked that because it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's my point. If I establish that a suspect is from Dublin 1, I'll say he's from Dublin 1. If I establish that he's from Romania, I'll say he's from Romania. Okay? I think you might have a slightly different view, but that has always been my view. We put the facts out there. I'm slightly worried that there is a view that maybe journalists should self-censor because there might be shit down the road. I don't think we can do that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking generally. If the suspect is Irish, I'll say he's Irish. If the suspect is born in Dublin 1, I'll say he's born in Dublin 1. If the suspect is from Uzbekistan, I'll say he's from Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
And that's why I have always... Now, we're in a no-win situation here because people of one hue will say, why are you putting his nationality in, right? And then people of another hue will say, why are you not putting his nationality in? So, fuck it. Facts speak for themselves. If people want to have agendas, I can do nothing about that. We write the facts. And I'd be disappointed if we decided, right, we have a story about a man who's appeared in court and he is from France. And we left that out because we were worried about consequences. We're journalists. Now, that might be a minority view. It might be a view that most journalists don't have. But for me, facts speak for themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you. I suppose maybe where I differ is I probably wouldn't have cared as much or thought as much to say a person's nationality when they're only accused of an offence. And now I unfortunately, and I do say unfortunately, think that there is maybe a need for it because of the fact that the misinformation then just spirals out of control. And I think we do have a responsibility as people who put information out there to tackle misinformation. And so that's why on, certain recent stories, I went out of my way to say a person who was a suspect in a violent crime was an Irish national because they were an Irish national. And I got a lot of flack for that, as though I was part of some sort of government conspiracy. I was a scumbag. I was a traitor. And I do worry we're not trying to appease those people because I think those people are so far off the reservation. Why even bother? But I think it isn't. I think it just, my only point would be, I think it's incumbent on us to tackle misinformation.
Yes. So the way I see we tackle misinformation is by putting the facts out there. Now,
yeah.
If a German national or say a man from Mozambique or wherever is charged with something, I'm going to put that in. Now, if racists want to take that up, that's on them.
Yes.
But people have a right to know. So that means if an Irishman or a dub is charged, we're saying it's a dub. If he's a foreigner, we're saying he's a foreigner. And I make no apologies for that. We cannot bow to the crowds on either side. We do our jobs, and that's it.
No, and there seems to be a misconception, or I don't know. Again, maybe I'm appeasing to a crowd that cannot be reasoned with. But I've seen a lot of people make commentary that, oh, well, if this was a foreign person, you wouldn't, you wouldn't name them. You wouldn't. That's just not the case. And there have
bollocks.
Been so many people of varying nationalities who have been accused, charged, sentenced, and we have covered the whole lot. From start to finish. And it's not about race for me, but I can think of a particular individual who was a sexual abuser, and he was a taxi man, and he had sexually abused multiple women. We broke the case. We broke his picture. We put his mugshot out there. After he was released from prison, covered the fact that he'd been released from prison early. We chased him up. We tried to doorstep him. we don't let up no matter what someone's nationality is. There's no agenda here. We will cover anyone, any crime that's committed as equally and as fairly as we can.
Yes, but you know where I'm coming from in this? I think, and I'm not talking about you, I'm just talking genuinely about
Yeah, I
media,
know.
right?
Yeah.
If journalists second guess themselves, I can't put in this fella is from Uzbekistan
Mm,
because the racists will go nuts. That's surrendering to the racists.
mm.
Facts are facts, and we are there to give people the facts. And you know what? People from both hues will hockey is for doing that. Let's just ignore the noise and do the story and write the facts.
I fully agree.
So that
Might leave
means
it there
including their
because
nationalities.
yeah, might leave it there. I mean, I don't understand. I suppose I just maybe it's social media and it's maybe perhaps not reflective of reality, but I cannot understand the sheer amount of people now that there seems to be that just live in this bubble. And I again, this is I'm not being biased here. I think when you've gone that far down the racist rabbit hole, that you cannot just see facts that are in front of your face. You just don't want to believe them. Those are people that look, we do have to challenge that. And it seems to be on the rise, sadly. And a lot of these people are involved in these violent incidences, these riots that are increasing. Look, there is a lot of anger out there in relation to migration and all of that. And I don't know enough about that to sit here and proselytize in relation to it. But what I would say is just, look, these people, you can't reason with them. So there's a balance, there's a fine act that we're just trying to report the facts. I think now, unfortunately, we have to go even further with the facts in order to maybe dispel some of the misinformation. But that's the only thing. I'm not interested in getting in Twitter wars with some far right idiot from who wouldn't be able to say to my face what they say on the internet.
Yes. So I think I have a slightly different attitude to this. I just ignore them. Right. and and it's great sometimes because they lose their head. They go, why aren't you answering me? I'm not answering you because I don't see your comments because I've set my thing, even just from my own mental health or sanity. You can't go down that route. But I will say there does seem to be an awful lot of really, really angry people about.
Oh yeah. And that's a new thing. I
It
don't
is.
I again I think social media is to blame. This is only my personal opinion. It doesn't mean anything, but I think an unchecked social media like X, and I love Twitter. I'm addicted to Twitter. It's my favorite social media platform.
Twitter's brilliant.
I put all my stories on it.
Mm.
But it has just become an absolute cesspit because it is
Mm.
unchecked. People can buy blue ticks, get themselves, higher up on the algorithm scale, and just outright racism and misinformation now rules the day on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it.
Have you noticed? And I'm going to say left and right. Are there are elements of intolerance that people only want to see facts that fit their agenda.
I'm fine with facts as long as they're facts. But when
No, but I know what I'm saying is, Paul. What I'm saying is, people, a lot of people on either side of this debate aren't. It's why did you write that story? Fuck's sake, why did you write that story? And you're doing something right if they're both sides looking at you. So, and I think they also overestimate our intelligence. We're just hacks. We just do the stories. We're not part of some Bilderberg or WF plan.
I was only
write the fucking stories.
I was only saying this to a couple of colleagues earlier. Like, I mean, these people give us far too much credit. If they think we're part of some grand conspiracy that we're all getting around a table and going, "Oh, now this is our agenda." Listen, I literally don't know what I'm doing from 1 minute to the next. So,
Paul, my name on Twitter is Mick the Hack. It's not Mick the Genius or Mick the Conspirator or whatever. It's Mick the Hack, and I'm a hack. And people say that to me as an insult. I take great pride in calling myself a hack because I just do my job.
Speaking of your job, let's move on to a story you were working on because we'll get out of this rabbit hole before we.
Is this about Italy?
Get ourselves into trouble. Yes. So
right.
I think this is a great story about scammers, Irish scammers who are absolutely making a complete fortune abroad.
Yes, and to stay in this rabbit hole for a second, they're Irish scammers. And the story was not that they're scammers, they're Irish scammers.
Irish.
And that's the fucking job we do. Or, if an Irishman is arrested for murder in Japan, it's an Irish fella. It's not a fella arrested for murder in Japan. That's my whole point. Anyway, so I have gone down this rabbit hole. There are roaming gangs going around Europe who are earning a fortune. In Italy, they call it the truffa, which is the scam. So they're scammers, gangs of them traveling around Europe, earning an absolute fortune. And because I monitor European media, I always get these stories. Well, every couple of weeks, you'll see the gendarmerie or the Netherlands police or the Spanish police. And in this case, it's the Italian police. So it's a place called Bolzano, which is in Trento Alto Adige, which is quite anarchically, it's an Italian province, but it's sort of independent. It's autonomous, and they're German speakers, right? Mostly German speakers.
Showing off your Italian
I am.
there.
Sorry about that. Anyway, so this Italian Guardia di Finanza, which is their sort of customs financial police, issued a press release the other day on, I think it was Monday. 9 fellas, including Irish and British, a gang of them, led by an Italian. Again, we can't mention that. Led by an Italian, were arrested for this scam, this tarmac scam. It's been going on for 3 years, and they are alleged to have made €9 million from this scam. And it's the scam that has been going around all around Europe. It's the same scam. Essentially what happens is these group of lads call to the doors, they target a village or a town, call to the doors and say, look, we've been doing some tarmac work for the council on the roads. We've got some tarmac left over. Would you fancy us doing a wee nixer for you doing your driveway? And they offer them a price. And the guys go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, no problem. And they do it. They then frequently overcharge them and threaten them. And within a couple of days, after they skedoodle, the tarmac starts to collapse. So it's a really, really poor job. And they just go around Europe. So I've been monitoring these gangs for a long time. Last year, a group called Sirasco, which is a French intelligence unit, released, they did a warning or an assessment that in France alone, there are 800 of these scammers going around earning millions of euro a year. And that's in France alone. So it is big money. And unfortunately, I'm sad to say, an awful lot of them are Irish. In France, they call it les bitumeurs, tarmac people, bitumeurs irlandais. So we're now known as exporters of scammers.
It's crazy. And you're hearing more and more of these stories. I mean, there was, I think, recently a story in Australia, a very similar thing, an Irish gang caught for scamming. So clearly it's widespread and worldwide, but it's more crime being committed by Irish people all over the world.
Yeah, and there was one in Netherlands which I was really interested in. It's the same thing, called to the house, I think they were also offered to do some work on a wall or something like that. But one of the ladies quoted in the media said they agreed a certain price, but then they say it was 500 quid. Then it went to 5,000, and then they started threatening them when she protested. So they do get quite aggressive, and they terrorize pensioners into giving them a significant amount of money, and it is shite quality.
Fascinating. Well, Mick, tell me this: how do you know they're Irish?
Because the police say they're Irish. Oh, you taking the mick, are you? What's this?
You didn't get their birth cert now, it's just because their name is Darby O'Gill, it doesn't mean.
Yeah, that's a very fair point, because you got a bit of grief in mentioning a certain case, and I was really interested in this because I said to you privately, you said firstly he's an Irish national, right? And then you said an Irishman. And in both those cases, looking at some of the comments of us, is he a real Irish person, or is he, what do you call it? An immigrant who's become Irish.
But I don't think we have to stoop to that level or engage with that. I mean, look, if you want to be racist, go ahead and be racist. We will report the facts, as we said, no matter what someone's nationality is. Sometimes Irish people commit crimes, and I know that's a sad reality for some people, but most people in this country who commit crimes are Irish, because guess what? We live in Ireland. That's just a fact. I might just leave it at that.
Yeah, after the murder of Aisling Murphy, because obviously Jozef Puska, the killer, was from Slovakia. And I remember doing an analysis at the time. It's something like 14% of people in Ireland are foreign nationals. And I think 15% of all murder victims in that year were foreign nationals. So there was a higher percentage of foreign-born victims than there are here. Do you know what I'm saying? So, but look, Paul, as I say, rock and mute. your two best friends.
We'll have our comments on this, so feel free to give us more abuse if you like. But if you enjoy listening to us, we appreciate nice comments too. So thanks very much.
Can I just make one point before we go? I just wanted
Of course,
to raise.
yes.
I was last week. I was away. I listened to your interview with Robin Schiller in last week's pod. I was over in Lebanon.
Oh, so yes.
I was over visiting the 124th Infantry Battalion, who are the Irish soldiers serving in Lebanon. There's the 123rd, who there was a swap over, and Taoiseach Micheál Martin went over, and we went to a couple of journalists, myself, Conor Lally, and a few others. Conor Lally from the Times, a few of us went over. So that's my 8th trip to Lebanon. Fantastic place. And again, I was just humbled as ever seeing the great work these soldiers do. There's a thing called Groundhog where they have to go into bunkers. And it was really interesting. We were there on a Sunday. Every day that week, they had to go into Groundhog because there were explosions nearby, apart from that one day. So there were no shelling or whatever when the Taoiseach was there. May have been a coincidence. I don't know.
You missed out on all the action.
Well, we heard some actually pretty close, but I think it was 7 kilometers away, but it is quite loud. I think it was a couple of mortars landed, and you could hear it because it reverberates around there, all valleys. It sounded close enough to me, but they were quite calm about it. I was a bit Rita Hayworth.
It's every day for them. They'd be commended for it. It's incredible.
They're a great bunch of lads, I have to say, and women.
So we leave it there.
Yeah.
Thanks as ever for listening to us. Comments are open. I look forward to reading them. So thanks always for everyone who listens to us and enjoys us. We'll be back next week.
And I look forward to not reading them. Thanks, everybody.